we will start with the lesson 10, which is about the Harshvardhan, and his rule was there around 600 AD. Okay, so you can say that Harshvardhan is probably one of the last rulers that you will be studying in northern India in the ancient history part. Okay, because after that, whatever you will study about the Pallava kingdoms etc., they will all be in the southern Indian empire. Okay, so you should congratulate yourself that you have completed almost 10 chapters of the ancient Indian history. So now, without wasting any time, let's move towards the lesson number 10 of the Tamil Nadu class 11 book, which is about the Harshvardhan empire. So here you will find that after decline of the Gupta empire, okay, there was like a void and there was a political disorder and disunity in the northern India. And why is this happening? Because Gupta controlled a vast empire, okay, a very very vast empire, and their successors were weak. There were already invasions happening from the northwestern India, for example, Huns, and then there were people who were declaring themselves independence. So somewhere you can find that there, now there will be, instead of one empire, there will be many people fighting against each other, creating political disorder and disunity. It was only in the beginning of the 17th century, or in the 7th century, that you will find that Harshvardhan actually succeeded in establishing another great empire called as the Harsha's empire. Now, the chief source of how do we know that there was an Harshvardhan empire or there was a king called Harshvardhan existed is basically from this book written by Bana Bhatta, okay, called as Harshacharita. And then there are other travelogues etc. written by Hyun Sang. As I told you, Hyun Sang was the second Chinese traveler that came during the Harsha's time. Now, Bana Bhatta, or Bana he was called as, he was the court poet of Harsha. So similarly, just like Hari Sen was the court poet of Samudragupta, Bana Bhatta was the court poet of Harsha. Yun Sang was the Chinese traveler who visited during this time, in India, and he was also basically coming from the Buddhist angle, and he also wanted to see how is the land where Buddha was born. And besides these two sources of Hyun Sang and Harshacharita, we also have dramas which were written by Harsha himself, like the emperor. And we already saw that how Samudragupta, he was also a great poet and a writer. Similarly, even Harsha was a great writer, and he himself wrote 3 books. And this you should know because this has been asked in prelims examination. What are these? Priyadarshika, Nagadanda and Ratnavali. Okay, which also provide a great information about Harsha's empire. The Madhuban plate inscription, just like there was Allahabad pillar inscription and there was Mehrauli pillar inscription. Here you will find you have Madhuban plate inscription and the Sonpat inscription, which basically is very very important if you want to learn the chronology of this Harsha empire. Okay, then one more inscription that you should know, which has been asked in the state services examination, is this Ban Sekra inscription, which contains the signature of Harsha. Okay. Now we will move towards the early life of Harsha. So Harsha, you will know, is the founder of the Harsha. Harsha is one of the Harsha, also called as Harshvardhan. Okay, he is basically one of the very prominent kings of another dynasty. Okay, which was started by Pushyabhuti. Okay, so the founder of the family of Harsha was Pushyabhutis, and they were actually fiduciaries of Gupta. As I told you, under Gupta they were like these Samants, who were like the people who used to maintain military, who used to also collect some part of revenue and then give it to the king. But these people became powerful as the king became weak, and that is why you will find that Pushyabhutis, who were one of the Pushyabhutis, who were the fiduciaries of Guptas, now declared independence. Okay, they called themselves as the Vardhanas, and after the Hun invasions, they actually assumed independence. The first important king of Pushyabhuti dynasty, okay, which is the one in which Harsha belongs. So this was basically Prabhakar Vardhana. Because they used to call themselves Vardhana, you will find it's Prabhakar Vardhana. It is similar to what Pallavas used to put a surname as Varman or Varmas. Similarly, you will find that Vardhana is a surname that Vardhanas, it's the same thing, and this is a surname that has been adopted by the Pushyabhuti dynasty. This capital was first at Thaneswar, which is in basically north of Delhi, and you will find that he also assumed the title of Maharaj Adhiraj and Paramp Bhattaraka. Okay, after this Prabhakar Vardhan's death, you will find his elder son Rajavardhan came into the throne, but he also faced the problems of succession etc. And his sister Rajashri, he married another ruler called Grihavarman. Okay, and then you will find basically a lot of things are happening in between. Okay, and there is a story also written about how Rajavardhan, he was returning and he marched against the king of this thing, but he was actually murdered. And after everything, like after all this is over, finally you will find that Harsha okay, he has now succeeded his brother at Thaneshwar. So he is finally taking the throne. But you should remember the first one who founded this dynasty was Pushyabhuti, and then his son Prabhakar Vardhan. Okay. Then you will find that Harsha was basically firstly responsible to rescue his sister and then to avenge the killing of his brother and brother-in-law, and therefore he did all of that. And you will find that he took out extensive military conquest. So in his first expedition, Harsha drove out Sasanka from Kannauj, okay, and he basically shifted the capital from Thaneswar to Kannauj. And this is the same Kannauj for which you will find there was a struggle going on between Rashtrakutas, Gujar Pratiharas and Palas, and this is what we call as tripartite struggle, and this you will read about in the medieval history. Okay, so it's the same Kannauj which Harsha has shifted his capital to, and now you will find that the Harsha is basically becoming more and more powerful, and he has become the most powerful king eventually in the northern Indian region. Harsha also fought against Dhruv Sena II of Vallabhi, and he defeated him, and finally Dhruv Sena became a vassal. Now the most important military conquest, if I would tell you, of Harsha was against these western Chalukyas and his ruler Pulakesin II, and this story has been written on both the sides, but both sides declare their ruler as winner. Okay, so Banabhatta declares Harsha as winner, and Pulakesin II's court poet was Ravi Kirti. He declares Pulakesin II as the winner. Okay, but this Ravi Kirti II basically writes that Harsha, after fighting the war, was no longer Harsh. Harsh means basically happy. So since he lost the war, therefore he was no longer happy. Okay, so now you remember who is the contemporary of Harsha? It's the Pulakesin II of Chalukyan Empire. Okay, even the Hyun Sang, inscriptions and his works have also basically told about the same. Now Harsha, with an ambition to extend his empire, like beyond south of Narmada, because even Chandragupta too could not expand his empire beyond beyond Narmada river. So Harsha wants to expand his empire. He actually marches against the Chalukyan ruler, but the Ahole inscription where Ravi Kirti, the court poet of Chalukyan ruler Pulakesin II, has written, okay, this Ahole inscription is the one where the defeat of Harsha has been written. Okay, and that is when it is written that Pulakesin II actually assumed the title of Parmeshwara because he was able to defeat Harsha. Okay, and Hyun Sang accounts also confirm that the victory in this war was of Pulakesin II, but on the Harsha side we have found some other story. Harsha also led another campaign against the ruler of Sindh, which was an independent kingdom. But it is doubtful whether the Sindh campaign was a successful one or not, because we have not much details about it. Nepal, we know, already accepted Harsha's overlordship. Okay, Harsha also established his control in Kashmir. Okay, and the rulers from Kashmir used to send their tributes to Harsha's empire. Then he also maintained cordial relationships with Bhaskar Varman, who was the ruler of Assam. So now he's going extreme east also, and he led military campaigns even till Odisha, which is the Kalinga Empire. Now thus you can see that Harsha's empire is extended in the east, okay, till Assam and Kalinga. Here in the north till Kashmir, even Nepal has come, and now in the northwest also he has certain empire under him. Okay, so whole of North India, including Rajasthan, Punjab, UP, Bihar, Odisha, they are all under direct control. But see, direct control is where king can have direct influence, okay, but his sphere of influence was much wider, because sphere of influence can be even on the rulers who are not directly in contact with you, but they fear that Harsha might come and take their empire. So his sphere of influence was much more extensive, and it fell till Sindh, Vallabhi and Kamrupa territories. Now we will talk about the Harsha and his basically conquest with Buddhism. So how basically Harsha became an ardent follower of Buddhism, etc. So what happened was, in his early life, Harsha was a devote of Shiva, okay, but later he became an ardent Hinayan Buddhism follower. But then what happened was, Hyun Sang visited the Harsha's court, and Hyun Sang was a follower of Mahayan Buddhism. So Harsha basically prohibited the use of animal food in his kingdom, and he also punished those people who used to use them for some reasons. So he erected thousands of stupas and established travel routes also, so that travelers rest places also, so that people can come and visit his empire much more often. He also erected a lot of monasteries, okay, sacred places of Buddhists, and once in 5 years you will find that he also convened a gathering of assemblies of representatives of different religions, where he honored them with gifts and costly presents. Okay, he was also fond of Buddhism, so he actually started calling these Buddhist monks so that they can address these assemblies and try to basically convert people as much as they can through a dialogue. And one of these assemblies we will study is basically the Kannauj assembly. So Harsha organized a religious assembly at Kannauj so that he could honor this Chinese pilgrim who has come to his court, which is basically Hyun Sang. Okay, and he invited representatives from all the religious sects. It was attended by 20 kings, 1,000 scholars in Nalanda University, 3,000 Hinayanists and Mahayanists also, 3,000 Brahmins and Jains. Assembly was continuously going on till 23 days, and Hyun Sang explained the values, okay, of Mahayan Buddhism, and then the doctrine, and then how it was superior over the others. But however, obviously, imagine you are from another religion and some other person has been called, okay, and he's explaining how he's better than you. So obviously there will be violence that came out, and you will find that there was also an attempt on life of Harsha to be killed, but soon it was brought under control, and on the final day of assembly you will realize that Hyun Sang was given an honor, and he was presented with costly presents and gifts by the Harsha himself. But here in this assembly you have not achieved anything. Then comes the Allahabad conference. So Hyun Sang mentions in his account about the conference which was held at Allahabad, which is also known as Prayag, and today it is called as the Prayagraj. It was one among the conferences which was routinely convened, as I told you, once in 5 years by Harsha, and Harsha obviously gave enormous gifts and costly presents to all the members who were present in the like this particular conference. And according to Hyun Sang, Harsha was so lavish that he actually emptied the entire treasury, even gave away the clothes and jewels he was wearing. Okay, and then after that he actually adopted Mahayan Buddhism. So then, after discussing about his religious, and then how his you can say how he converted from being a Shaivite to Hinayan, then to finally a Mahayan Buddhism. Now we will talk about the Harsha's administration. Okay, so the administration of Harsha was organized on the same lines as the Gupta did. Okay, Hyun Sang gives a detailed picture about this, and the king was just in his administration. He was punctual in discharging his duties. He also made frequent visits of inspections throughout the dominion. Okay, and you will find that Harsha, you can say that Harsha was doing so many things that he felt that the day was very, very less for the amount of activities he wanted to do. Taxation was very light in his empire, and forced labor was also not much present. 1/6 of the produce was collected as land revenue, because we know that agricultural revenue was one of the state's largest source of income. Then cruel punishments of the Mauryan period were again started in Harsha, although they were not present in Gupta's time, but they were again started in Harsha's time. Hyun Sang condemned these trials as barbarous and superstitious, and Harsha's army consisted of 4 divisions. Okay, one were the people who were on foot, then other were the people who used to drive horses, then the people who used to drive chariots, not horses, and another one who used to basically drive elephants. So there were 4 divisions of army. The number of cavalry was obviously more than 1 lakh, and the elephants more than 60,000. Now imagine the enormous amount of army that Harsha has, and this was much more than the Mauryan Empire, but definitely lesser than what Guptas had. Okay, the maintenance of public records was a salient feature of Harsha's administration, and he used to basically archive whatever was happening, good or bad, and there were special officers who used to do that. Okay, and this thing that they are writing was called as a Nilo Potu. Okay, where basically they are writing about day-to-day activities and what is happening in administration, good or bad, both. Then we will talk about the society and economy under Harsha. So both Banabhatta and Hyun Sang, they actually give a good amount of light on the social life in the times of Harsha. They say how division of society was very strict, and they were fourfold division. The Brahmins definitely were the privileged ones, and they were the ones also getting the land grants. And before we move forward, you should know the first one to issue land grants to Brahmins, okay, were Satvahans. And this has been asked in one of the prelims examination. So Satvahans were the one who started this concept of giving land grants to Brahmin, but then it continued through various ages, and now you see even Harsha is doing it. The Kshatriyas were the ruling class. The Vaishyas were mainly the traders, and Hyun Sang mentions how Shudras used to practice agriculture, but there also existed caste within caste. So there were many subcaste also, and position of women, just like in Gupta Empire it has worsened, you will find here also it is not satisfactory. The institution of Swayamvar has actually declined. Remarriage of widows is not permitted, especially among the higher caste, and the system of dowry has become very common. Practice of sati has also been seen, and Hyun Sang mentions how basically there were 3 ways of disposal. Either you basically cremate them, okay, or you basically water bury them, or you expose them in the woods for the bacteria and fungus to do their work. The trade and commerce had declined during Harsha's period, and we cannot say that it was bad. We are just saying that compared to Gupta Empire, the amount of trade that was happening during this particular empire was less, and this was evident by the decline of the number of trade centers, the decline in number of coins issued, slow activities of merchant guilds. The decline in trade, in fact, impacted the handicraft industry and agriculture, and since you can see that there was no large scale demand, so there was no large scale industry or agriculture production also. So here what will happen, you will find that villages, instead of producing more and selling it outside, now they have become self-sufficient. That means they do not want to basically buy or export outside. They just want to produce enough so that they are able to meet their own needs. And that is why you'll find that here there's a sharp economic decline in the economic activities. Okay, and especially from the, if we compare it to the Gupta Empire. Now we will study about the cultural progress. So the art and architecture of Harsha's period was, you can say it was definitely not like, so extravagant like what we saw in the Gupta period, but it also had very few and, few style, but it was definitely a continuation from what we have studied in Gupta. So Hyun Sang describes that glory of monasteries with many stories built by Harsha at Nalanda, and we already know that Nalanda University was built by Kumar Gupta, but then it was also destroyed in between, and then Harsha is again rebuilt it. He also speaks a copper, statue of Buddha, which is basically 8 feet in height, and then there was a brick temple which was made in Lakshman at Sirpur, and you will find that it was also very rich architecture. So, and this is also a good example of Nagara style of architecture. The Harsha was a great patron of learning, and I told you that his biography was basically written by Banabhatta, his court poet, and it was called as the Harshcharitra. Sorry, Banabhatta, he wrote Harshcharita, but then Banabhatta also wrote another book called as the Kadambari. Okay, then we also know that Harsha himself wrote 3 books: Ratnavali, Priyadarshika, and Nagananda. Basically, these are 3 plays written by Harsha. Then Harsha also patronized the Nalanda University, and he made it grant. They also, like, he basically, just so that Nalanda University is able to sustain, he used to basically give them grants, liberal endowments, and basically gave permission to Nalanda to adopt the villages nearby so that they can take care of their revenues and expenditure. Then we will also find that Hyun Sang visited Nalanda University, and he remained there as a student for some time. Now, before we move forward, because this has been a question asked in UPSC mains about Taxila University, there's a very, very good chance that they might even ask you about the Nalanda University, specifically at the time when Nalanda University is also UNESCO World Heritage Site, and we are also trying to basically revive, Nalanda University. So Nalanda University, you will find that Chinese travelers who came to India, they also visited a number of education institutions. Like, there were 3 famous Buddhist universities. One was Nalanda, then there was Taxila, then there was Udantapura, and then the most famous among them were this Hinayan University, which was in Vallabhi, and then the Mahayan University of Nalanda. So Hinayan University is in Vallabhi, and Mahayan University is in Nalanda. Hyun Sang gives a very valuable account of how was Nalanda University, what was happening, etc., and how basically the term Nalanda itself meant giver of knowledge. So Na-landa, that means giver of knowledge, and it was founded by Kumar Gupta, I already told you, but it was patronized by Harsha also. And the professors of these universities, they were called as Pandits, and some of these renowned professors were Dinganaga, Dharampala, Tirumathi, and Silabhadra. Dharmpal was a native of this Kanchipuram, and he became the head of Nalanda University then. The Nalanda University was a residential university. That means you cannot go home and then come to university and then go back home again in the evening. Basically, you had to stay there on campus. So it was a residential university, and education was free, including the boarding and lodging. That means you had free food and free sleeping. It was maintained with the revenue which was derived from 100 to 200 villages which were endowed to them by different rulers. Though it was a Mahayan university, but different religious subjects like yoga, Hinayan doctrine, Samkhya, and all these philosophies, even Vedas, was taught inside this Nalanda University. In addition to it, the general subjects, for example, logic, grammar, astronomy, medicine, art, culture, all of this was also taught. It attracted students not only from different parts of India, but also from different parts of the East specifically, but also from the West. The admission was by the means of an entrance examination, which we see even today, and the entrance test was so difficult that not even more than 30% of the candidates could actually pass. Discipline was very, very strict, and more than lectures, there was an emphasis on discussion. And this has been even the model of the Shanti Niketan, which was started by Rabindranath Tagore in the modern period. When he said that the education was not about the rote learning, but it was about the education discussion that you are happening and the amount of knowledge that you are gaining through that discussion. The recent archaeological excavations which have brought to light the ruins of Nalanda universities. It shows how grandeur center it might have been of learning at that point of time, and how it was a great, site for visit by Chinese pilgrims. It had numerous classrooms, a lot of hostels, because it was a residential university. According to I Singh, who visits later, the Chinese pilgrim, there were 3,000 students in its, in present in Nalanda University. It had an observatory also, it had a great library also, and its fame rested in the fact fact that it attracted greatest scholars. Even the ambassadors who came to India, they could not become professor there, but they used to become a student there. Okay, and that is how you will find that this Nalanda University was very, very famous amongst all these scholars, and it was an institution which was basically known for advanced learning and research. So what we call as IITs of today was basically something we can call Nalanda of that time. Okay, with this we actually complete this unit 4 of class 11th Tamil Nadu book, wherein we were discussing ancient history. And here with this chapter we have completed the North Indian ancient history. In South India we have already considered Sangam age, and then we will start with Pallavas. So I hope you are liking the lectures. Please do like, share and comment. Thank you.